Now, our last paper is, in fact, a yoga history paper. And Giri, who has worked for many years within the world of yoga, not in the studio, but as myself in the more traditional context, grounded with a through line to Bengal. What more can I say? Giri.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Let me take the screen. All right. Okay, how does that look?
Almost good. There's good.
And you can see the slides moving?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Those were amazing presentations. So there were times when I had tears in my eyes seeing how far you guys have come. It's wonderful. And my name's Giri Bhai. I'm here on beautiful Tongva land to present to you my paper, Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā, Ramakrishna's Worship of Sarada Devi through a feminist lens. And just looking at these three figures here, you see Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa centered in the middle. And his wife is next to him, Sri Sarada Devi, as well as Swami Vivekananda, the outspoken devotee of Ramakrishna, who participated greatly in bringing yoga knowledge to the West. Ramakrishna and Sarada Devi were Bengali Hindus in the 1800s, and they married in around 1859. And the event that I'm looking at, called Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā, in which he worshipped her as the living goddess Shodashi in his room during the Falahardini Kali Puja, this actually occurred on June 5th, 1872. When you look at the different hagiographies, there's probably 5-6 dates, but this is the most commonly cited one. So I believe this one is the most true. There's a few key important aspects to cover around Ramakrishna, and our wonderful scholar here, Christopher Key Chapel, actually talks about the importance Ramakrishna contributed to modern yoga, and that is his emergence from states of darkness through his tantric practice and his initiation with Brahmani Bhairavi, and his deconstruction of fixed gender roles, which you see in his practice of Madhura Bhava, dressing in the clothes of a gopi when aspiring to worship Krishna. And his embrace of religious pluralism. So this is commonly the most commonly exported part of Swami Vivekananda's teachings. And his excitement, the excitement generated by his moments of spiritual insights and freedom through his ecstatic bhakti to Ma Dakshineshwari Kali. And the significance of Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā, according to Swami Chaitananda, is the following 3 points. This event served to awaken Sharada's divinity, which she already had innately inside of her, but this puja served to awaken it. It was dormant. It also showed and manifested the intimate relationship that Ramakrishna had with his wife Sarada Devi, and it clarified Sharada's future role in the Ramakrishna movement. She would eventually become the leader of Ramakrishna Order and Mission in his passing, and she was an initiating guru who initiated Swami Nikhilananda, who wrote the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna that was an export of the Sri Ramakrishna Katamrita to the West. And I'm looking at this from a feminist lens. So why does this matter in feminist discourse? The first thing I want to look at is, what role does the Academy play in constructing narratives about the Ramakrishna tradition? So I'm looking at various texts from scholars like Narsingha P. Sill, Jeffrey Kripal, and a long list of scholars in this tradition that have commented on Ramakrishna. And I'm doing a little bit of a post-colonial analysis on these texts to understand if they still fit. And what are the specific rituals conducted in Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā? So there is a reconstruction of the Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā in this paper, which was a difficult task, which involved gathering 10 to 20 hagiographies with very short, brief sections on Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā and putting them all together to understand what Ramakrishna may have actually done in this puja. And finally, I'm also developing a feminist contract. So does the Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā provide a feminist contract that can broaden and empower the psychospirituality of female lay devotees through its subversion of the typical gender hierarchy? So my thesis revolves around this Ramakrishna Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā and focusing on how this awakens Sharada's innate divinity. And based on this transformation, I'm generalizing Kali Bhakti as a template to establish a core and indigenously Indian and Hindu feminism. And in addition to that, I'm also deconstructing some of the Western traditions and that tend to hypersexualize or psychopathologize Ramakrishna's mystical experiences. So I'm offering a more apologetic view on Ramakrishna as more of a proto-feminist. In my textual analysis, I had to look at three main texts for this, analyzing this puja, and that was Sri Sri Ramakrishna Katamrita for the just discussing the life of Ramakrishna. There's a more lengthy description of Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā and Sri Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga. All of these are Bengali texts that were translated into English. And then finally, I'm using Swami Chaitananda's Sri Sarada Devi and her Divine Play, which was written in English and comprises various Bengali texts. I did a literature review and also a Western scholarship, including Max Muller, Alan Roman, Narasimha Pisel, and Jeffrey Kippal. So there's a lot of deconstruction. These early reviews are very romantic. They're very supportive of the Bengali hagiographies, but they weren't very critical. And the later critical accounts are also, in my view, a little bit reductionistic. So I'm finding the middle ground between these two worlds. And then in terms of critical methodologies for the feminist construction, I'm looking at Ronald Inden's work, how to deconstruct Western scholarship and Orientalism, and talking about how the academy constructs narratives around India and Hinduism, particularly the Ramakrishna tradition. And I'm using also various Indian feminist voices. So I'm amplifying voices like Gayatri Spivak, Vrinda Dalmia, Vindhya Undurti, and Maheshwari Naidu, who all offer amazing contemporary feminist views that are very in line with what I'm writing in this paper. Vrinda Dalmia's work, Loving Paradoxes, actually forms the basis of this paper, where she talks about how Kali Bhakti is consistent with modern feminism, in line with Ramprasad Sen's poetry. So I'm sort of continuing her work and generalizing it to Ramakrishna and his Kali Bhakti, and particularly Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā. There were also interviews conducted that didn't feature into the paper, but their contributions were so great in terms of the conversational dialogue that I got out of these individuals and their ideas that really helped structure this paper. So you have Swami Ambikananda, Brahmachari Atmaram, and Haley Goswami. So although their work isn't featured in the paper, it would be a shame to not give them some credit for their ideas. And in this paper, one of the largest sections is around the reconstruction of this puja. So there is a painting here of Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā, where Ramakrishna is sitting in his room with Sarada Devi in front of him, and he has all of the items of ritual offering. So this is described briefly in Sri Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga, and the problem is that this is an event that no one knows what actually happened. So we're trying to understand it after the fact. So we're only recreating something that we actually don't know anything about. So I'm drawing on various hagiographies. I'm also using Gudrun Bunneman's work on Shodashi Puja, the 16-article puja worship, which also includes the preliminaries to puja. And I'm referencing various parts of the hagiography. For example, in this quote, she talks about how Ramakrishna offered her conchas and bangles and saris. So you can take this quote after the fact and kind of reason that there must have been a garment offering based on the Ṣoḍaśī Puja. So I'm doing a lot of this work of reconstructing an event after the fact. Here's some various articles that Ramakrishna may have used: the Koshakushi for catching water, the Kunda, and the Gata, which usually holds a coconut and a few leaves. So these are various Bengali articles of worship that he may have actually used in this puja. And you can see that the most pivotal event at the ending of this puja, Ramakrishna actually offers his japa mala. So this is his rosary, which you see one around my neck. And on this, he would chant the holy names of Mother Kali, his daily sadhana, his practice. So in offering her his mala, he's actually transferring a lot of his spiritual acumen over to her. So there's a transferring of his mission and his spiritual life over to his wife. And the various hagiographies say that this is the culmination of Ramakrishna's sadhana and the end of his sadhana. And moving on to the feminist construct. So this is a feminist construct that I call Stri Shakti Bhava, and I'll discuss what that means in a minute. I had to go through various narratives being discussed in the Hindu religion as well as in India. So one of the most common features is Vinayak Damodar Sarvarkar, who created the Hindutva narrative, which kind of, in terms of gender studies, it focuses primarily upon pativrat and this idea of the wife's subservience to her husband. This is a very traditional narrative. I've also looked at other narratives. For example, Gayatri Spivak, in her conclusion to her paper, Can the Subaltern Speak? She famously concludes the subaltern cannot speak. So this is a very difficult position to put the scholarly community in. So we have to reanalyze the role that we play in analyzing the other and the structures and hierarchies of power and knowledge that exist in that dialogue. So there's a lot of opportunities for understanding gender in different lights in the Hindu religion, not just traditional narratives. So here is Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi, and she's a famous transgender activist who's also sitting with the sadhus at Kumbh Mela. So there are various things happening in the Hindu religion that you could say point to more contemporary understandings of gender studies, gender fluidity, transgender, LGBTQ. So when Ramakrishna dresses in female clothing and talks about himself as if he's a woman, you can start to think about more contemporary context like feminism and contemporary gender studies. So creating a uniquely tantric feminism requires 4 pieces, and I call this Stri Shakti Bhava, which is essentially like the mood of an empowered woman. And I'm arguing that this requires 1, Stri Shakti, the identification of a source of power in goddess iconography. So the goddess is the power. And that power is transferred through Shakti Pata. These are tantric terms that I'm co-opting. The transfer of the feminine power from the divine to the female lay devotee occurs through some process. In this case, it's the puja. And then this elicits a Devi Bhava. The woman is empowered and actually becomes the goddess, assumes the identity of the goddess, which happens in the Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā for Sharda Devi. And finally, it's naive to just think that a spiritual transformation alone can change the structural impediments to access to healthcare and education for women in society. So this transformation has to be followed through with seva, Shakti seva. So in terms of the Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā, Shodashi is identified as a source of feminine power. This is our Stri Shakti. The Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā acts as a Shakti pot. So Ramakrishna transfers his spiritual acumen over to her, offering his japa mala. And then she assumes the attitude of the goddess, becomes the goddess. Her innate godhood is awakened. She's empowered. And from this empowerment, she gains a leadership role in the Ramakrishna mission, which has various philanthropic arms to it, including relief and rehabilitation work, medical service, including constructing hospitals, education work, including the construction of colleges, work in rural areas, welfare work, work for women, activities for young people, spiritual service, and work outside of India. So you can see some of these activities include donating clothes, donating blankets, and constructing schools for women where hundreds of girls can go and get educated and change their position in society through that education. And to simplify things dramatically, Swami Vajrayana says, loving her transforms our lives. It's a very easy quote, understanding that Kali Bhakti and this devotion to Ma Kali that Ramakrishna expressed, and through the Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā, your life is simply just transformed. It will never be the same. Swami Vivekananda was very prescient in his understanding of what Sharda would do. He says, as soon as there is an awakening in women, you will see the whole nation will rise up in its pristine glory. For that reason, Holy Mother has come. With her advent, there has been a stir among the women of all countries. This is just the beginning. You will see many more things later. So this Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā gives us a way to look at contemporary gender studies through the Hindu religion and perhaps offer a more interesting approach for women to gain access to leadership roles, to gain spiritual empowerment, rather than feeling oppressed by religion. So thank you all.
Thank you, Giri. If you could take your screen share down, that would be
Yes.
great.
Let me figure that out. Stop the share.
And I'm wondering if you might share some reflections on the status of the convent women here in Southern California, because they have carved for themselves a very unusual niche within the Ramakrishna order, both in Santa Barbara and here in Hollywood. So I'm just wondering if you have some information or reflections vis-a-vis Sarada Devi.
Yeah, I think you know, it starts with representation. So if women have no access to leadership roles, then how can they inspire young girls to also aspire to leadership roles? How can they feel empowered by the tradition? So I think that what's interesting about the Ramakrishna tradition was this sort of proto-feminism where Swami Vivekananda was sort of looking towards the future, and he said, hey, we need to develop, you know, a nunnery, essentially. It didn't happen until much later, but the development of this nunnery gives women access to leadership, to drive spiritual narratives. It also allowed women to take initiation into the monkhood, which is essentially, you know, pretty new. So rather than the religion being just governed by a heteropatriarchy, and I'm not denying the existence of the heteropatriarchy in our religion and in every religion, these are just facts, but we're looking towards reform and changing the tradition and taking back the tradition so that it can empower us. So I think the nuns in Southern California, I don't have too much of a reflection on them specifically, but the Ramakrishna nuns, to me, it's inspiring to see them have these leadership positions as essentially monks, where we're not only empowering men to be monks, we're not only empowering men to have spiritual liberation or spiritual insight, and we're also allowing them to initiate individuals into the religion itself as well. So this is, I think, the first step. Give them leadership roles and amplify their voices, and then we can actually talk about, you know, structural change to society.
There's a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I'll let you field the questions in the chat.
Let me see. Okay, there are a lot here. 7:15. Okay. So okay. I think you said, Giri, did you find any sort of secular opposition to any sort of feminist lens via this particular topic? Yes, I think the Western Academy is opposed to probably opposed to a lot of what I'm saying. So in Jeffrey Kapal's work, you see him talking about actually saying that Ramakrishna was a misogynist. And he says there are two narratives. There's the scholarly narrative of Western scholars that are saying Ramakrishna was a misogynist, and then there's the devotee narratives who are calling Ramakrishna a proto-feminist. So there's a lot of opposition also in the sort of traditional narrative. So this Hindu right-wing nationalism is very much about this patira. So this idea that the woman is subservient to the husband. In Shaktiism, though, we're also talking about the male being, the husband being subservient to the wife. So you have a natural subversive tendency in Kali Bhakti. The Kali tradition itself is subversive in so many ways, in more than just this idea. So I think there is a lot of secular opposition to this idea of generating religious narratives about feminism. But when you look at let's say Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, she wears the hijab, she wears a headscarf covering. To her, this is empowering. So this is a type of feminism that is uniquely Islamic. So in the same way, we can look at what's a uniquely Hindu feminism that's also empowering for women within the Hindu tradition. So yes, I think there's definitely some secular opposition, but we have to reclaim the traditions, you know, in the same way that Martin Luther King reclaimed Christianity for Black liberation theology. We can reclaim these concepts and make them ours again.
On that, scroll down in the chat.
Let's see here. Patricia.
Suggestions on his puja in present day, and then two later, has this teaching impacted your life?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, let's see, the puja, let's try that one first. Yeah. Do you have suggestions on how this puja might be implemented in our present day? I don't, because I think this is a unique event, but however, I will say it is practiced by the Ramakrishna order as a holiday. So they're worshiping the image of Sarada. I don't know how it could be done, let's say, between a man and wife. I think these are tantric secrets that you have to learn through initiation. So I don't know who's teaching them. I know this is a real thing because when Ramakrishna studied with Brahmani biography, you see in the hagiographies that she actually had him sit in a woman's lap and do his japa and told him to worship her as the divine mother. So we know that there was a precedent for this in his tantric training that translated into the way he worshipped Sarada Devi. So I know there's methods for this. I have never practiced them, and I don't know who's teaching them. So I think the answer is through Tantra. Has this impacted my life personally? Absolutely, yes. I received initiation from actually Swami Bhajananda, who's actually, I believe, in the room. So, and although these hagiographies very briefly cover Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā, in Dharma talks among monks in the Ramakrishna order, this is a big concept. Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā is talked about all the time in length. So I thought to myself, how come there's no scholarly discourse on Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā? This paper is essentially the first of its kind. No one has tried to really look at Ṣoḍaśī-Pūjā in a full-length paper. It's only gotten small sections in hagiographies and small sections in academic papers. So I think it's impacted me on a scholarly level as well as on a religious level. And I personally actually worship Kali and worship Sri Ramakrishna and Sarada Devi and Swami Vivekananda. So I think, but I think the personal impact came first, and then the scholarly discourse came next.